for tuning in on Facebook Live for Gregory Spaid's Artist Talk here at the Riffe Gallery. Gregory's work is featured in our current exhibition, Natural Expressions, which is an exhibition curated by 4 high school students with the help of Aaron Shapiro, who is the curator at the Springfield Museum of Art. This exhibition just opened on July 25th, so be sure to get down here and check out all this awesome new art in the gallery. And yeah, continue listening and watching to hear more about Gregory's artwork. I think this will be a really great artist talk. So Gregory.
Thank you, Alexa. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming here. I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. And I'll try to avoid that. There are some other people to thank, and Alexa didn't say too much about what is unique about this show. It's the first time that this ever has happened here at the Riffe Gallery, which is that students were involved, high school students. Michaela Anderson was the student that I worked with, and she helped write the text. She functioned as a curator for the show. So there was another curator from the Springfield Museum. Her name is Aaron Shapiro. But students were involved in this. It was a way of trying to get high school students to be fully involved in sort of the art exhibition process. So I wanted you to know about that. I want to thank those people as well. I would like to know a little bit of something about who you are. So because my talk is going to be about the natural world and about trees, I want you to give some thought for a second to what's your favorite tree? And I'm going to ask you, Josh, what's your favorite tree?
Maple.
A maple?
No, pine.
Pine, all right.
Willow.
Susan, what's your favorite?
Ginkgo.
A ginkgo. What's your name?
My name is Chiquita.
Chiquita, what's your favorite tree?
We already said pine.
It's okay. No, you can.
It's a dogwood.
Dogwoods are nice, yes. What's your favorite tree?
Oh, so many, I'll say, all the evergreens.
All the evergreens. Okay. Yeah, what's your favorite tree? What tree do you like? We'll come back.
Autumn?
Autumn, okay, in general, fall, leaves. You have a favorite tree? Favorite? Okay. Son? How about you? Favorite?
Weeping cherry.
The weeping cherry. Oh, I'm not sure I know exactly what that looks like.
Probably coconut palm.
Coconut palm. Right. What's your favorite tree?
I like weeping willows.
Weeping willows. Oh, those are really special trees in a lot of ways. I'll talk more about those. All right, so I've got something else for you to do, but you're not going to say anything. Again, because this is about the natural world, about nature, I want you to take just a minute. We'll all be quiet. And I want you to think about an experience you've had in nature that was pleasurable or important to you in some way. Maybe it was joyful in some way. Maybe it was just a significant, memorable experience that you had with nature. And it can be nature of however you want to define what nature is. Think about that. Just think about it for a minute. I won't say anything. Okay. That was just kind of a warm-up to some of the things that I'm going to talk about. I am going to talk about art and decisions that I made as an artist in making the work that is in this show. I'm going to show you some slides, particularly for those of you at home or wherever you are, who are watching this. But in the course of my working on a project, an art project about trees, I did a lot of reading. And there were some writers in particular that became meaningful to me. And I want to read you a couple of very short quotes by two poets. And both of them have written poems that are called The Wild Geese. The first poet is Mary Oliver. You may know Mary Oliver's work. She's written a lot about nature and the natural world. She liked to walk in nature, and then she would write poetry about it. She died just last January, but I think she's a pretty famous nature poet. And in her poem called The Wild Geese, this is what she said. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. One of the reasons that I wanted to quote that poem was that I think we're all right now trying to figure out what our place is in the family of things, in nature. What's our relationship with nature? And are we satisfied with that? Can we change it in some way? Okay, the next poet and writer is Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry actually doesn't live too far from here. He lives in northern Kentucky on the Kentucky River, a little bit beyond Cincinnati, on a farm. He's been a farmer his whole life and a writer. And so he also wrote a poem called The Wild Geese. And what I will tell you about this is that this poem is about him going on a walk with his wife. And so this is a little bit of that poem. Geese appear high over us, pass, and the sky closes. Abandon, as in love or sleep, holds them to their way. Clear in the ancient faith, all we need is here. And we pray, not for new earth or heaven, but to be quiet in heart and in eye clear. What we need is here. I think that's a really hard lesson. What Wendell Berry is saying is the natural world is all we need. You know, we keep wanting to exploit it, manipulate it, whatever. But it's enough, just as it's enough for the wild geese. I don't know that I'm up to that lesson. You know, I keep wanting more, something else, something new. Artists are that way. They're always pushing for something new. But maybe one of the things that we have to do is figure out how to settle on what's enough for us and not need more. So that's a couple of poets that have been significant to me as I have worked on this project. I wanted to say something also about how I got started thinking about trees and making work about trees. And one of them was just something I happened on. It was an article that I read about patients that were recovering from gallbladder surgery in a hospital in suburban Philadelphia. It was in 1984 that this article was written in Science magazine. And the thrust of the article was that patients took a day less time to recover. Instead of taking 4 days to recover from gallbladder surgery, it took them only 3 days if they could see trees out their window of their room. And I thought that was something mystical, magical about that. Simply by seeing trees, it changed them physically. I think that probably what people have now determined has happened is that it dropped their stress level to be able to see trees. And if you're stressed, as most people are when they're in the hospital, they don't heal as fast. So if anything could be done to drop that stress level, you can heal faster. We feel more whole if we have less stress. So hospitals now, that was 1984, hospitals now are redesigning themselves so that there is more access to be able to see outside, to see trees. They're deliberately planting trees. And in hospital design, they're also putting in something called healing gardens, where the patients and the people that work at the hospitals, who are also under stress, where those people can go for walks in nature, and it can settle everyone down. The other thing that I encountered was that in Japan, they have a term called forest bathing. And particularly out near metropolitan areas like Tokyo, huge city, Tokyo, people go for walks, in the woods in order to settle themselves, in order to feel better. The Japanese term for that is Shinrin Yoko. And that too seemed kind of magical to me, that just by taking a walk in the woods, you can feel better. But apparently that's true. So I decided that what my project was going to be about was not simply trees. I'm a photographer primarily, so I wasn't just photographing trees. But it was about our relationship with trees. We need trees, and trees probably need us as well. The natural world needs us. So that's how I got my start. All right, now let's see if I can make this work. Here's some of the photographs. So I've done a series, what's on the wall over here, that some of you haven't seen yet. I call the leaf cut series, the leaf cutting series. It actually uses leaves as part of the process, and I'll explain that process to you in a minute. For the people that are watching the streaming version of this, let me just click through a few of these so you get a sense of what these look like. They're compositions that are made out of leaves that I've collected. And I'll say more about how they're constructed in just a minute. Okay, that will sort of give you the flavor of them. As a photographer, I've always wanted to do more than just take photographs. In fact, I like to think of making photographs rather than taking photographs. And in this case, I literally make these images. So again, I go out, I collect leaves, I dry them, I flatten them, I even use a process of bleach, household bleach, to make them more transparent. And then I attach them to what you would call, in old photography, a negative. I make a negative. You know what negatives are? We don't have those in our cameras anymore. But here they are. I brought some of them in. I don't know where to put them up so that you'll see them well. They're 4 by 5 inches on a piece of plastic. And I have them attach leaves to that plastic. Let's see, I might be able to find the one that is up here. Okay, that one's here. It's changed a lot. It's this. You see it? So I have glued the leaf to the plastic, and then I put a cover sheet over that, but the glue is still wet. I've cut the leaf, I've cut the edges of the leaf, cut the bottom of the leaf. I put a cover sheet over it, which allows me to sort of press, to squeegee it down to get good compression and good adhesion. And then I pull the cover sheet up. And when I pull the cover sheet up, something almost magical happens, and I get these patterns. I don't intend, I have no idea what I'm going to get. And part of this process for me that's exciting is that I don't know what I'm going to get. It's an adventure. It's like going someplace you've never been before. So every one of these is different. Every one of these is a surprise to me. I still have to make a decision whether I like it or not. But that's more or less how they're done. Sometimes then I varnish them as a way of sort of protecting them. And then I would go into the darkroom. You all remember darkrooms. I would go into the darkroom and I would make a print, photographic print, out of one of these negatives. After a while, I decided I didn't like that. I wanted to try something different, and so I scanned them. And I made a digital file out of them by scanning them. And then I was able to bring them into my computer and sort of manipulate them on the computer. So one of the things that that allowed me to do was that I could work with either the negative or the positive of that negative. Let's see if I can show you it here. That's the positive. That's the color that it actually is. That's the negative. So if this were a brown leaf and we saw the opposite of that, this is what you'd see. The brown leaf would become blue. So it allowed me to change things that way, to make them go from positive to negative, to make the colors different. I also started experimenting with using maple syrup. So this is a maple leaf, and I use maple syrup as the glue to hold it together. And that was kind of interesting and fun to do, and it seemed to make sense because it was Ohio maple syrup, Ohio leaves. But what I discovered was that the maple syrup hardly ever dried, or even if it did dry, then when it got warm again, it would get gooey. So it was kind of a mess to use but I still have been experimenting with natural things that can work as an adhesive instead of just sort of regular glues. Okay. Another thing that was important to me in this work was the veining of leaves. I spent a lot of time thinking about the structure of the leaf and the way it creates veins. And I'm just amazed by how the way that looks is very much like the veins in my eye, the blood vessels in your eye. You ever see that? Or the blood vessels that are in your lungs. Or when you look out of an airplane and you look down at the ground, you can see the water drainage of rivers and creeks that branch in the same way. So I'm fascinated by how these things are connected from very small, like our eyes, to leaves, to the landscape. The desert looks that way. I'll show you some photos of that in a minute. Okay, I have a short statement about the leaf cutting series that I hope will help make some sense. So I say, I think that the leaves in the series, I think of the leaves as visual representations of wildness, and they're just left alone. Well, I think of the alterations that I make to them, the cutting that I do to them, as a form of rational, human intervention. I believe that the motivation behind doing this, the cutting of the leaves, comes from something, this human impulse that has been with us for a long time, going back to antiquity, to the classical world, where they talked about it as Apollonian versus Dionysian, or order versus chaos, or civilization versus wilderness. I'm trying to play sort of with one of those off of the other, because I think it's kind of the dilemma that we have in our lives. We want order, but we also want spontaneity. You know, we want wilderness. Wilderness is natural, nature is beautiful, but then we think of it as a resource, and we manipulate it in some way. Another way to think about this in the New World, America in the New World, was the impulse to control nature that Europeans brought here, in contrast to the impulse many native peoples had to live in harmony with nature. I think we're all groping with that sort of a conflict even today when it comes to the environment, when it comes to the natural world. You know, what do? Do we seek to preserve it? Do we exploit it? Or do we do some combination of the two? And I guess what I would have to admit is that I do some combination of the two. No matter how much I would like to not drink water out of plastic bottles, I still find myself doing that. Or no matter how much I say to myself, you know, when I go to the grocery store, I want to take those bags in the back in with me and not use plastic bags. But it's so hard to sort of get to that point, I think, where you can do that, where you see it as that important. So it's always a kind of compromise we're working with. Okay. By the way, what I didn't say to you is you should ask questions at any point. If you have questions, please. Because among other things, it gives me a chance to take a drink of water.
So Greg, the patterns then behind the, that's from adhesive, glue?
Yeah. So Josh's question is, the patterns behind the leaves, is that glue? Is that adhesive? And in almost every case it is, but I also sort of spritz them with India ink. I'll see if I can find one that way. Now that's glue. Okay, the pattern behind this one comes from the fact that I have a little spritzer. I have diluted India ink in it with water, and I spray it. It goes all over the leaf as well, and then I take a paintbrush and I sort of clean off the leaf. So yes, there's always some other element that is involved in this as well as the leaf. Thank you. Any other questions? Please ask. The color is actually what is there in the leaf. But sometimes, as I said, I flip it. So we're seeing the opposite, or the complementary color. This is a negative that is flipped. So we're seeing light on dark instead of dark on light. Another than light on dark. And sometimes they look like they're X-rays, or if they're really transparent, the light's going to go through them when I scan them. This is another example of the negative color. This is a green leaf, but then the complementary color of green is this sort of purple. So that's how I get those additional colors. And even though they're subtle, for me those colors are important to me in the work. I've already said this, but another thing that is important to me here is I love the spontaneity. That as a photographer, we tend to go out and think, you know, we're going to make photographs of something and we have an idea of how we want them to look like, the way we want them to look. But with this process, I don't know in advance. Although the more I do of it, the more sense of control that I'm able to get. Okay, as I've been thinking about my work, I'm not going to show you all that I've ever done because I've done a lot of different processes. But one series that I did a long time ago, 1973, I used cans, and I did something that was similar to what I'm now doing with leaves. I collected cans that had been crushed on the road, and I thought about them in sort of aesthetic terms. I collected them and then I photographed them and made these prints. So I think in some way they're similar. The other thing I think that this shows is one of the things that I think my work always is involved with is taking something that seems to be overlooked or something that seems to have no value. A leaf seems like a nuisance in many ways, right, in the fall. We have to get rid of them on our yard. I like taking something that we see that way as being almost valueless and then doing something to change that, to give it value, create interest. I think the cans do that. Another thing that relates to this, I think, is that quite a while ago, what was the date on that? 1986, I was doing a series of paintings that were about trees, and trees at night. And you'll see later when I show you some photographs that I'm doing a lot of photography at night. So these were called star trees. I was interested in the way, on a clear night, you could see stars, in winter particularly, you could see stars coming through the trees, almost as though they'd been captured by the tree. I talked to you already about seeing the ground from airplanes. And I had a period of my life where I was doing a lot of flying because my job changed and I was an academic administrator. I was in planes much more than I had been before. And so I had a real simple camera that I used to photograph out of planes. And I made photographs like this. This is the Sonoran Desert, not far from Phoenix. And I'm amazed at how, we can see the same kind of a structure of branching that happens from the flow of water across the desert, even across the desert. The other thing that I see in these is that dichotomy that I'm talking about in the leaf cutting series. The idea that we have this impulse where we want to organize things. That's the way we humans tend to think. Nature operates under different principles. And so in these you can clearly see that sort of what human beings have done. I call the series Scratch the Earth. It's like we've scratched our mark on the landscape. Look at that. Some kind of an irrigation system in Arizona. So precise, so geometric, but it's set within the context of the desert. This is some farms outside of Minneapolis. I was flying into Minneapolis, and it's winter. You can see both the combination of sort of natural forms and also then what the farmers have done, what we humans have done. And again, this is the desert, the Sonoran Desert. I'll come back to the Sonoran Desert in a minute. All right, reading trees. So as I got involved in this project, it's a large project. It isn't just the leaf cutting series that you see here, but it has many facets. And I wanted to show you some of those. I can't possibly show you all of them. It's an ongoing series for me. In fact, I think it's probably going to be a life's work. There's so much that could be done. But I've thought about trees and leaves in a variety of different ways. I've been lucky enough to go to different places and make photographs, and New York City is one of those places that I go fairly regularly, but also to wilderness areas. I'll show you those in a minute. About reading trees, though, and where I got the title for this comes from, again, some of the reading that I have been doing, and I saw so many references to people trying to understand trees, and even making direct references to the fact that trees speak to us. I don't think that means with a voice, but I mean there's something there that we could figure out if only we paid enough attention to what the tree was trying to say to us. So that was the reason for the title of this, Reading Trees. Here are some of the writers, and these are all poets. Marie Howe, who's my current favorite poet from New York State. She said, the oak tree seems to be writing something using very few words. Oak trees are kind of silent. It's as though they're writing something. Billy Collins, who was a poet laureate of this country a while back. Bare branches in winter are a form of writing. Philip Larkin, another poet from another generation, said, the trees are coming into leaf like something almost being said. And then scientists are doing this as well. There are a number of books out now by scientists who are taking trees very seriously for the meaning that they have in our lives. One of them is David George Haskell, and he wrote, to listen to trees, nature's great connectors, is therefore to learn how to inhabit the relationships that give life its source, substance, and beauty. And then finally, a writer who I actually got to meet and listen to her give a talk. Her name is Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's both a scientist, but she's also a member of the Potawatomi Nation. And she tries to blend her science with the sort of ancient wisdom of Native people. And she wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which I recommend. She said, the trees especially, we recognize as our teachers. Okay, so here's some photographs from my series of reading trees. The color seems off on these a little bit, but keep it in mind. So, I think of these as portraits. I don't think of myself as a landscape photographer, although eventually I may start thinking that way, but at least for now, these are more like portraits. And as I said, they're taken in various places. New York, this is South Carolina. It's actually a plantation called the Botany Plantation near Charleston, South Carolina. New York again. This is the Front Range in Colorado. This is Knox County, Ohio, where I live. New York again. Another aspect of this series is that I started thinking about our relationship with trees, and one of the things that happens with trees, I think, is that they function as a veil. They sort of throw their veil down. Weeping willows do that, of course. This is a weeping willow. Weeping willows are almost magical trees. The ingredients for aspirin comes from weeping willows. And it was discovered because weeping willows would drop this substance into the rivers or lakes or ponds below them, and fish would gather there. And people began to wonder why fish were there in such abundance. And apparently they were getting something healthy from the weeping willow tree, which we do now when we take an aspirin. So also I saw this as a veil. Another aspect of this project is shadows. I think another way we experience trees, we walk down the sidewalk or whatever, we perhaps don't see the tree, but we see the shadow of the tree. So I've tried to concentrate on shadows. In this one, I particularly like the way the branching of the tree and the cracking of the concrete wall behind it sort of rhyme with each other. Another thing I try to do in these photographs, again, I'm usually not happy with just a sort of straight photograph. I like them when they look like they have another quality about them. They may look like a painting or something else. And so this is a good example of that. This is the foot of Wall Street in the background, but it looks like it's a painting or a drawing. It actually is just a photograph. The oaks. Oaks are very special to me because I live in a place where there are these massive white oaks and red oaks. And so in the winter, I don't make as many photographs outside, but I've started collecting the leaves, bringing them inside, and photographing them with the sort of intense sunlight that comes in my studio windows in the winter. And I particularly like when I see on sidewalks, when I'm on a walk and I see a leaf has fallen there, and then it has this structure that almost looks like it's architecture. I can imagine these much larger. So this series I call The Oaks. I've been lucky enough to have several artist residencies, and some of them have been at national parks. So AIR here means artist in residence. And the National Park Service has a great program for artists to be able to go there. I went to Mesa Verde National Park. Anybody been to Mesa Verde National Park? Yeah. That's where the ancient cliff dwellings are. You've probably seen photographs of those. But I went there because of the wildfires. In the last 100 years, 80% of this huge park has burned from wildfires. And what's even more alarming, I suppose, is that 50% of that has been in the last 20 years. So the frequency and the intensity of fires are increasing. And some of that, no doubt, has to do with global warming, which makes beetles more active. More trees are dying, they're falling, they become tinder for lightning strikes. And so there's more sort of natural fires that are occurring. Here are some of my photographs taken among these sites of wildfires. I was allowed to sort of roam freely through these sites because I was an artist in residence, and I really found them to be magical.
Did you set up lights?
Say what?
Did you set up special lighting for this?
Yeah, these are almost all taken at night. Let me try to change the color. I can't do too much about it. I use a flash on the camera, and that's where the light's coming from. I had to carry all my equipment with me as I walked into these sites, so I didn't have a lot of extra equipment, but I had a flash on the camera. Thanks for the question. Yeah?
I was just wondering, how often do you just walk by a tree and you say, the light is perfect, I have to get this now? Or how often do you say, I'm going to save this for later and then come back at a specific time?
That's good. So the question is, how often do I walk by a tree and say it's perfect, I've got to take this photograph now, or how often do I just sort of make a mental note and try to come back later? I'd say most of the time is if the feeling is right, I take a photograph then, because I don't know in this case that I'd never be able to find that tree again. But one thing I have learned about my work is that it isn't like just passing through and making whatever you see and then moving on. I try to go back to the same place over and over again because I feel like I get to know it better if I can do that. And I happened to be at Mesa Verde when there was a full moon, which made it even more exciting to be out in the landscape. These burnt structures, from this intense heat, of a wildfire. They're called snags when the tree is still left standing. And this intense structure seemed to be very sculptural to me, as though something an artist had made against the sky here. I had another artist residency in South Carolina, Congaree National Park, which is in the central part of the state. And I do want to say something just about national parks. And that is, I think that they are incredible things that we have in this country. I hope you all are able to get to a national park. They're very special things. The United States was the first country to actually have a national park. And some people have said that it's the United States' best idea that we set aside land to be a park that is really owned by all of us. We're the owners of these parks, we as citizens. So I encourage you to go to national parks, but they're sort of being loved to death right now, especially the really famous ones, Yosemite, Yellowstone, parts like that. You're going to find a tremendous number of people at them. So search out some of the others that are a little bit less known. Thankfully, we're still creating new national parks. And this is an example of one of them, Congaree. Has anybody been to Congaree? Have you even heard about it? Because it's relatively new. It was a national monument for many years, and then only recently, I think it was about 18 years ago, it was made a national park. So it is what is considered to be a bottomland hardwood forest. And we might call it a swamp. Most of the park is like a swamp. But it's actually just floods that come in periodically, and then they go away. So it floods about 6 or 8 times a year, and I was lucky enough to be there during a flood. It also was a very magical kind of experience, place to be. And I love the disorientation of these images. It's sort of hard to figure them out because of all the reflections that are involved. The yellowness of the water, that's tannins in the water. It's like tea that create that color. So, what it looks like in the flood. In the highlands, there are some bluffs that get up out of the river bottom. And in those areas, loblolly pines grow in great abundance. And these are these extremely tall, straight pine trees, loblolly pines. Another thing that I have tried to do is concentrate on bark, on the trunks of trees. And partly that's because that's often what we see. You know, we don't see the whole tree. It's hard, in fact, to photograph an entire tree, a large, mature tree. So this gave me an opportunity to photograph the tree with something set against it. This is what this series looks like when it's installed in an exhibition. They're actually mounted on wooden panels, and they come off of the wall a little bit. This blue paint, maybe you've all seen it, it's what foresters, Forest Service uses to mark trees that are going to be cut down. And out west right now, there are a lot of trees having to come down because of a pine bark beetle that is destroying a lot of trees. Also something related to the warming environment. So they're marked like this, they're later cut. Often they're cut so that they don't fall on the road when they're eroding. This is in Central Park in New York, where I take a lot of photographs. My home. And now, more recently, what I've started to get interested in is what I'm calling a series of tree fantasies. I'm wrapping up. And it's where I deliberately bring additional color Part of that comes from the fact that when you photograph trees, you're photographing green all the time, except for in the winter. And so I've tried to introduce other color into it. And it started with a photograph like this one, where this was an accident. I didn't know what was going to happen. But something about the different colors of light that were falling on this tree in front of the Guggenheim Museum in New York created those blues and other colors that are there. It's just a mixture of different light sources. So I thought, well, here's another example. This is the public library, main branch of the New York Public Library in New York. And I was photographing these London plane trees behind the library. And they had this blue on them because there was some kind of a outdoor theatrical event going on, and they had blue lights that lit them up. So I started deliberately doing this myself. And I do it in two ways. I have a flash. You know what a flash is like on a camera, that I cover with a filter. Or I have a flashlight, a very intense LED flashlight that I cover with a filter. And I paint the light on. And so whenever you see two colors involved here, it's usually a combination of two of those things. This is a field not far from where I live at night. This is Central Park again. The Guggenheim Museum again. This is the Metropolitan, front of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. I said that we come back to the desert, and my most recent artist residency was called the Sonoran Desert Artist Residency. And it was a little town called Ajo, almost to the border, the Mexican border. So it was really an incredibly interesting place. I was just there last year. But it's also the area of the desert, the southwest, where there is the saguaro cactus. And so I couldn't help but use the saguaro cactus to be my subject, and then to experiment with lighting it in different ways, in twilight or on into the evening. These are some of those photographs. That's it. Thank you, guys. Glad you came.
Does
I hope
anyone
it was worth your time.
Any questions for Gregory that they didn't have time to ask during the artist talk? Because now would definitely be the time to ask them.
With your light color pictures, is that just one picture, or do you take several and then combine them?
They're not combined. It's just one, although I take several to have many to edit from. Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to say that I haven't yet said, and part of the reason that I asked you to think about a moment that was important to you at the beginning, when you were in nature, that gave you pleasure, maybe even joy. One of the reasons is that in my work, I've decided that what I need to do is try to emphasize that aspect of nature that can give us joy. There are many other approaches you could take. It could be very critical of what human beings are doing, for instance. It could be very political. But I don't think that's worked. In fact, even sustainability, the idea that we should create a more sustainable life, doesn't really seem to be working. We're still losing trees at a far greater rate across the globe than new trees are being planted. The temperature of the climate continues to increase. So some of the writers that I have been reading talk about how what we need to be doing is to encourage people to get back to their feelings of joy when it comes to nature, that we have to love nature more. And it also seems important that children, we have to find ways of introducing children more to being in nature. It's harder and harder to do that, I think, but it can be done. There's a book that's called The Moth Snowstorm where the writer Michael McCarthy says he thinks that being able to recapture that joy that we experience in nature may be the most serious business of them all, in terms of our ability to be able to save our planet. And so, one more thing. Any other questions? Okay, one more thing. I have 2 grandchildren now, and I'm really happy that they love being outside. And they can name animals, they can name trees, they're especially good at naming birds. They really are engaged. They're 6 years old, and 2 of them, 6 and 8 years old. And from time to time, I write poems for them. So I have one here that I think is sort of appropriate for what we've been talking about here. This is a children's poem written for Theo and Elizabeth. And it's called Words from a Tree. I'll end with this. Maybe you could help me write a poem about a tree. That sounds like fun to me, you see. We could start at the top, where the birds sometimes stop. Then we'll get on our knees and look at some leaves. We could put on our boots and walk on the roots, or wait until dark and touch the rough bark. We could climb up the branches and look for an owl. And if we do find one, we'll let out a howl. We could wait for a crow to land in the branches, then talk real slow and see if it answers. We could find a big limb and tie on a swing made of wood and strong rope, a quite wonderful thing. So how do we start, you and me, to write a poem about a tree? Let's look up at a tree as we lie on the ground and catch all the words that come floating down. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and for tuning in to Gregory's Artist Talk. Just a reminder that this exhibition will be up through October, so we hope that you come in and experience the exhibition. We have lots of other programming to offer as well, all of it free and open to the public. So thank you guys so much.